Is China using its Lunar New Year to intentionally weaponize a new COVID strain? You've probably heard that China has a problem with COVID again, and that it has locked down its population in a zero COVID policy. What you probably don't know is that the Chinese Lunar New Year is about to begin, and that New Year travel has just begun because they've lifted those restrictions. 1 billion Chinese have started moving, either on vacations around the region or some are just going home. It's very interesting that in 2020, it was just about this same time of year that we started hearing about COVID in the first place, in January 2020, corresponding with that year's Lunar New Year. Are we looking at a repeat of what happened in 2020 to a somewhat smaller extent? And if the virus begins to spread, are we looking at our globalist-led nations trying another attempt at locking us down? And will China possibly use the unrest caused by a breakout to its own advantage? Pretty interesting questions, I think. But before we start to discuss them, a shout out to one of our biggest friends of our channel, Jonathan Merrill, for alerting us to this possibility. Now, let's start putting all these pieces together to begin answering those questions. First, what exactly has happened in China? Well, according to Andrea Garcia of the American Medical Association, China is seeing the highest number of cases per day since the start of the pandemic. And there are increasing reports of some severe disease there. Now, China's zero COVID policy kept that under wraps, to some extent, but now China has decided to open the floodgates and let everybody go wherever they want, which I'm not opposed to personally. I'm just saying this is what they're doing. There has been lockdown after lockdown, which has slowed the ability of the Chinese to become immune. That's the real issue. And now with them suddenly moving, with all the restrictions removed, COVID is spreading rapidly through the country due to the mixing of all these people traveling. They are being released on the world, in our opinion, as one huge COVID bomb. Will this increase COVID cases worldwide? I would think almost assuredly. Look for February and March cases, the case counts to be way up. Is this intentional on the part of the Chinese? Well, it's hard to say. But why did China lock everyone down and then release them all at once at the height of the infection rate? A very strange policy. Wouldn't it have been smarter to not have a lockdown at all and allow immunity to build normally? Or if there was a lockdown, keep them in lockdown. One way or the other, whichever way China felt was better, it doesn't make sense doing it the way they are. So, how might this fit into our end time theories? What might China do to take advantage of this? And importantly, what might our globalist-leaning governments do to take advantage of a burst in COVID activities? Those are questions we're going to try and answer in today's video. Do I think we need to be concerned health-wise? Well, I can't say. But what I am concerned about is what China does and what our governments do. Knowing our governments, they are just dying to reinstitute testing, mandatory testing for everyone coming into the country, masks, maybe even lockdowns. Now, back in 2020, we weren't prepared for these sorts of impositions on freedom. But now in 2023, we've been through it once. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment at the end of the video. But first, what about China? As we said, what the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party are doing right now seems to be create intentional chaos, trying to cause an impact, which may not cause a lot of deaths. But just imagine how the governments of the world are going to respond if suddenly cases start skyrocketing. And I think that may be what China is counting on, what they're hoping for. China is looking over at Taiwan and wondering what the ideal time to invade and take over might be. They have seen what their partner Russia has had to put up with in Ukraine and likely aren't interested in similar drawn-out wars or a similar sort of sanctions, those kind of things. So is China going to use this to try and cause other countries to panic into locking down their borders, closing things down, imposing all sorts of restrictions, like taking away rights, freedoms, and restricting movement? So just as the winter offensive over in the Eastern Europe is about to start in Ukraine with the cold weather. That's going to be a distraction. And if the nations begin to lock down again, that is a major distraction. It might be a perfect time for China to invade Taiwan. If they do, with the distractions of what the nations may term a, quote, health emergency, and with a fresh Soviet offensive in Eastern Europe, will the world be up to stopping China from taking Taiwan? I could easily see China using these distractions to quickly and almost quietly take what they want. Now, this doesn't mean that this is going to happen. Does not mean that. It's just a theory, but it sure smells like it to me. And part of the reason I feel that way is where we are prophetically in the end times and what Jesus prophesied would be happening at this time. So where are we? We have Jewish rabbis and Islamic clerics both saying they are in contact with their respective false messiahs. We have a war in Ukraine, nation against nation, with the rumors of a nuclear war on the horizon. We have Russia, China, Brazil, Iran, India forming the BRICS alliance, opposing the NATO alliance, potentially kingdom against kingdom war. We've had one pestilence, and now with this, there's the threat of another. We're looking at the strong possibility of economic meltdown in 2023, followed by food shortages and probably famine. All these things together sound an awful lot like Matthew 24, 4-8, the beginning of the birth pangs period. So it is very likely that the next step in the process might be the BRICS alliance of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, trying to consume as much flesh as Daniel 7 says, and each taking advantage of international chaos to invade their favorite target. For China, that's Taiwan. So prophetically, this seems ideal timing if we were reading the scriptures correctly. So we should all be watching for these things, keeping our eyes open. And if our eyes are open, what should Christians be doing? Should we be running scared? Hardly. But what I think we should be considering is how will the governments react if this happens, and how should we respond? You should be prepared for your government to do crazy stuff again. You will know this is going to happen if you begin hearing the mainstream media stirring things up and trying to scare the public. That is the sign that governments are getting ready to act because the media do their bidding. So I would be prepared physically because you might not have access to the supermarket next month. And we should be prepared to push back if they try to shut down our churches again. Something like supermarkets, you're not going to be able to change. You have to prepare in advance. Something like churches, we may be able to push back. I do know one thing about tyranny. Once bureaucrats take power, they want to use those powers at any given opportunity again and again and again. They get hungry for that type of power. And of course, I would be prepared spiritually because we appear to be hurtling into the last days at record pace. If you aren't working with last days overcomers already or supporting us, now may be the time. The QR code on the screen will take you to our website, and there's a link down in the description. And of course, quietly, while all these things distract us, the U.S. government is also testing out a digital currency. We need to keep our eyes on that. Click right here to keep watching because digital currency is necessary for the mark of the beast, and they are likely going to implement the digital dollar this year. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.